I'm Emily Chang in Washington, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, Mark Zuckerberg faces the wrath of European Parliament and leaves a lot of questions unanswered and a lot of lawmakers frustrated. We will bring you the highlights. Plus, could the cryptocurrency market soon have a friend in Washington? The so-called crypto candidate, congressional candidate Brian Ford, joins us to talk about why he thinks a digital currency expert should be in the Capitol. And in the world of esports, competitive play and Fortnite are anticipated to gain even more popularity this year. We're going to ask the Allied Esports CEO how they plan to tap into this massive market. But first, to our top story, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg testifying before the European Parliament. He faced tough questions about data privacy, advertising, GDPR, and whether Facebook is a monopoly that needs to be broken up. Zuckerberg, meantime, had one specific message to convey, and that is that he is sorry.
But it's also become clear over the last couple of years that we haven't done enough to prevent these tools from being used for harm as well. And that goes for fake news, foreign interference in elections, and developers misusing people's information. We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility, and that was a mistake, and I'm sorry for it.
Here to talk about the testimony, we are joined by Bloomberg Tech's Sarah Frier in San Francisco, and in Philadelphia, Scott Vernick, a partner at Fox Rothschild, chairman of the firm's privacy and data security practice group, who's been called a trailblazer in cybersecurity law by the National Law Journal. Sarah, I want to start with you. Give us the roundup, the hearing not ending on a high note with lawmakers saying, look, we asked you a lot of questions that you just didn't answer.
You know, part of that was just due to the nature of the way the hearing was designed. We got about an hour of questions from these European lawmakers before Zuckerberg even had a chance to respond. And then when he did respond, he spoke for about 26 minutes, and he was able to just go in an order that he preferred based on his notes, said, oh, you asked a lot of questions about content, you asked a lot of questions about this and that, and kind of respond with the stuff that Facebook has been saying recently, and maybe not so much digging into the most interesting questions, those ones about Facebook's increasing power in the world, and the ones about how exactly they will protect people from new issues with regards to data privacy that have come up as a result of our examinations of Facebook over the last couple months.
And there were a couple of questions, Scott, specifically that he pivoted on and dodged when it came to tracking and security and so-called shadow profiles. You know, did you hone in on anything in particular that you felt was questionable?
Look, I think that under the circumstances and given the atmosphere that was highly charged and highly combative, I actually think, and I'm no defender of Facebook necessarily, I think Zuckerberg did well. I think he basically handled himself pretty well and held his own. But you're right. There were some direct questions, particularly directed to the issue of whether or not Facebook is a monopoly that needs to be broken up, that he did not answer, understandably so. And he did not also directly answer the question around shadow profiles and what information is kept on non-Facebook users for security purposes. Those are questions that I think he purposely pivoted on, and that he prefers to either not follow up on, or, as he promised, he would follow up on in the days to come. But I think, again, this was a format that he chose. He did not necessarily want to be cross-examined in the way that he was on Capitol Hill, and therefore he gave individuals an opportunity to speechify, and then he could sort of hit the high points from his standpoint.
And what is our understanding of how shadow profiles actually do work on Facebook? Scott, do you have more information than Zuckerberg gave us?
The only thing I can tell you is that what concerns people on Capitol Hill and what concerns legislators in the European Union is that Facebook supposedly or apparently does create profiles on non-Facebook users who have internet activity. And they claim to keep that information for security purposes, separate and apart from people's profiles. Now, if you understand what I said, you're better than I am, because I can't figure out exactly what Facebook means when it says that. But I think it's troubling that when you don't look, if you use Facebook, as one of the parliamentarians said, you have some obligation to police yourself and police what you're doing online. But if you're a non-Facebook user, the fact that they are creating a profile about you, or at least creating and holding information about your internet activity, I think that's troubling to a lot of people, not just consumers in the European Union, but frankly, consumers everywhere. And I think the other question that he did not answer, which I think is going to get some continued attention, is the fact that Facebook deliberately moved information belonging to non-European Union residents out of the European Union recently and back to the United States. Now, I think the reason for that is pretty obvious. He did not directly answer that question.
Right, and we're talking just a few days ahead of GDPR going into effect in Europe. Sarah, is there anything you want to fact check there?
Well, I just want to make a point about this tracking of non-users. Facebook actually did answer in a very low-profile blog post after congressional testimony what exactly they do with the information they get on people who do not have Facebook accounts. And let me tell you, it's not about security. Security is like maybe the seventh reason. But first and foremost, they are tracking these people because they have to, in order to, if you're going to figure out what Facebook users are doing on other sites on the internet, you basically have to scan everyone who goes to those sites. And then in the non-users, they said what they do with that information, in addition to sort of checking identity and things like that, they make sure that those people, if they don't have Facebook accounts, get to be targeted with advertising that they should join Facebook. So there are a lot of reasons why it helps Facebook to track non-users. And I should also say, this same problem applies to issues like facial recognition. Very hard for Facebook to implement facial recognition only with the people who opt into it. The people who don't opt in still get scanned, but maybe that information doesn't get used in the same way as the people who do opt in. So very interesting debates to come here in the European Union.
Now, something else that's come to the forefront is fake accounts on Facebook. As we know, last quarter, Facebook removed hundreds of millions of fake accounts. Hundreds of millions of fake accounts removed the quarter before, so this is an ongoing problem. He did address how they are using AI to combat this problem in the future. Take a listen.
We're also using new technology, including AI, to remove fake accounts that are responsible for much of the false news, misinformation, and bad ads that people can see on Facebook.
Scott, how concerning is this fake accounts issue, given the scale, but also the fact that it seems like Facebook has dealt with this quarter after quarter after quarter?
Yeah, look, I think it's an ongoing issue for Facebook. It's not exactly clear whether they're winning the war on fake accounts or not. One of the people participating in today's hearing, in fact, said that the number or the percentage of overall fake accounts is actually growing. I think someone cited the figure of it was 2 to 3% of all Facebook accounts, and now it's grown to 3 to 4% of all Facebook accounts. So I think the reason why it's particularly troublesome is because, at least in part, it's the fake Facebook accounts that are responsible for, among other things, interference in national elections. And I think Zuckerberg himself said they were too slow to react to the Russian issue in 2016. They claim to be doing a better job. Many, many people in Europe are concerned, given the number of elections that are scheduled in the next year or so, that fake accounts that seek to interfere and manipulate or otherwise improperly influence elections will continue to be an issue.
What kind of action, Sarah, could Facebook actually face in the EU, given GDPR is already going into effect, but that the EU has taken a stronger line on Google, for example, the massive $2.7 billion fine over the shopping services, a big tax penalty for Apple, a fine for Facebook about how it's handled WhatsApp? What sort of actions are we potentially looking at?
I think the antitrust questions were really interesting in this hearing, whether Facebook should also be able to own Instagram and WhatsApp. Those were certainly top of mind for European regulators today. And I think that the company, GDPR is one thing. Whether that law is very strictly enforced for Facebook is another thing. And Zuckerberg needs to show here that he's making a good faith effort to really keep the best interest of European users at heart. But if there's anything in Facebook's actions that really illustrates otherwise, then they could take some stronger action than maybe the company is expecting. Like, for example, the FTC policy in the United States, that was in effect for years, but it was never really enforced. So it's, in many cases, it's not just the law that matters, but how strictly it is implemented.
All right,
I think
Sarah Fryer,
absolutely...
who covers Facebook for us. Go on, Scott. 30 seconds.
No, I was going to say, I think Sarah is absolutely right. I mean, at this point, if I was Zuckerberg, I'd be more concerned about antitrust action taken by European regulators than I would necessarily be about whether or not he's compliant with GDPR, because I think that that's a potential weakness that may well be exploited in the coming months.
All right, Scott Vernick, thank you so much. Partner at Fox Rothschild and our very own Sarah Fryer.
Thank you.
Thank you both. We're continuing to follow. A story we are watching, Intel has disclosed it found another way to attack computers related to the chip security flaws announced earlier this year. The company also said there's no evidence of it having been used to hack computers, and a fix is already in place. Coming up, the company behind the hottest video game is making a big push towards esports. Details on Epic Games' $100 million investments into esports next. This is Bloomberg. Esports continue to gain traction around the world, and one company wants in on the action. Epic Games, the company behind the hit game Fortnite, has announced $100 million in prize pool money for Fortnite competitions in the first year of competitive play. Not much detail has come out about what the tournaments might look like, but if last month's tournament in Vegas with Fortnite mega streamer Ninja is a preview of what's to come, this could be a serious game changer. The event in April was held at the newly opened esports arena in the Luxor Resort and Casino in Las Vegas. Allied Esports is the company behind this space and other arenas around the world that allow gamers to meet up and compete in the hottest new video tournaments in what could become a $1.5 billion industry by 2020. That's according to Newzoo. Joining us now with more, Allied Esports CEO Judd Hannigan. And Judd, first off, I feel we have to start with Fortnite. What is it about this particular game you think that has captured the fascination of a generation or two of gamers?
Emily, Fortnite has really taken the world by storm. It's truly grabbed gamers everywhere, and it really speaks to the volume and the excitement around the battle royale genre of gaming, which is has been around a while but has really picked up steam. But as of March of this year, research firm Superdata reported that about 40 million players worldwide and $223 million in revenue in the month of March alone for Epic Games and what is this phenomenal growth in Fortnite.
So how do you imagine these competitions actually working? Is it every person for themselves? Is it teams? Will they be happening in your arenas?
Absolutely. I think the beauty of this genre is there's a 1v1 format, there's a 2v2 format, and then there's a 4v4 format as well, with a lot of creativity and other formats, I'm sure, coming on the back of this. Even 50v50 it can happen in these games. The interesting thing about a battle royale format is usually there's about 100 players that drop into a map, and you're scrambling for weapons, and it's a last man standing type of game. So there's really no limit to the creativity that can happen inside these games. And so what's coming from Epic and other creative tournament organizers like ourselves will be truly exciting for the industry as a whole.
So talk to us a little bit about how you see these fitting into your arenas and your realm.
Sure. I mean, for Allied, we have 6 arenas around the world to date in North America, Europe, and China. Our flagship opened up in March in Las Vegas, and one of the things that we really looked at was the rise of Fortnite and how truly powerful and popular this game was, and how do we bring that excitement into a building. And so what we did was we partnered up with the most popular influencer and streamer in that game, a guy named Tyler Ninja Blevins, and brought him in, where he's typically streaming from his home to millions of viewers every day. We brought him into Las Vegas, headlining on the Las Vegas Strip, and basically created an environment where players in the arena could play with him. Really an enhanced experience overall.
You know, there's talk about how Fortnite is a more potentially inclusive game, but do you think that could help or hurt esports, given the traditional sort of first-person shooter audience?
Well, esports really covers a wide variety of games. There's multiplayer online battle arenas, which are team-based. There's first-person shooters, which can be team-based. There's team-based shooters. There's a lot of different genres out there today. And Battle Royale is just another example of that. It just happens to be the one that's growing the fastest right now, largely on the back of games like Fortnite and others that have really seen a rise, and the inclusiveness to it, the ability to play in different formats within the same framework of a game is exciting. And you can see that by the interest in people watching and tuning in, but also the amount of players is just phenomenal.
So, you know, when talking about hit games, there's always this question, is it a flash in the pan, or is this going to be a franchise that is going to generate hundreds of millions of dollars year after year after year? Is it too early to say that Fortnite is going to be a lasting hit? I just think about Pokemon Go, for example, which really was a moment and not a movement.
Well, I think that you're right. It's early. One of the things that's amazing about this industry is the games keep changing. New games keep coming. And while not many people had heard about Fortnite 6 or 7 months ago, it is the hottest game today. And this industry has that power for a newcomer to come along and for more growth and more users and more players. And that's one of the things that's exciting about it. But this throw of $100 million in prize pool into this industry. Last year alone in 2017 was $112 million in the esports industry in prize pool. So we've just doubled that in one game. It's exciting, and it's certainly this kind of makes you feel like Fortnite's here to stay, but the industry is going to keep coming out with more and more creative games.
There's a new Overwatch League. There are the revamped League of Legends leagues. You know, what are the lessons that you're learning in terms of what works and what doesn't work when it comes to these big pro esports leagues?
I think one of the things about us as a company is we're game agnostic. We try to work with everybody. Our facilities are infrastructure that the industry as a whole can utilize. And so, you know, we work to create leagues and events and try to work with a wide variety of publishers. So each game has its own nuances, what works and what doesn't. There are different folks that are exploring in different ways. And that's exciting because the industry is really so nascent that it's figuring that out. And we'll see as this evolves over time. The great thing is that the power and the numbers and the interest globally. This year it's projected to be a global esports audience of 380 million people worldwide. With that kind of power comes a lot of opportunity to grow and explore. And the fact that it's truly global allows a great path for that.
I do want to ask you about Amazon and Twitch. You know, the company made a big splash buying Twitch for $1 billion. We talked about it a lot at the time, but we haven't talked about it as much since. What has been Amazon's influence on Twitch, and where do you see them taking it and fitting it into the overall Amazon empire?
Well, I think if we just talk about Twitch for 1 second, Twitch, this industry really evolved with the idea of a live stream platform, and Twitch really was a first mover in that regard. So that's where the majority of this audience, certainly in the Western Hemisphere, is tuning in. Amazon's acquisition was extremely brilliant when it comes to harnessing the power of this demographic that's tuning into this, and nothing reaches the 18 to 35-year-old demographic, much like esports and really gaming. And what's going on there is much more than just competitive video gaming. It's entertainment. It's folks like Ninja who are broadcasting themselves to millions of people just playing this game, and that they can appreciate what he's doing. Amazon's ability to connect that with all of their other offerings has really allowed for them to be able to cross-market a lot of their other services. And I think that's the brilliant power of what they've done by acquiring this audience. For us in the Ninja event, we now have the most viewers on Twitch for a single stream just on that event alone, which was 680,000 and 2.4 million over the broadcast.
Judd Hannigan, CEO of Allied Esports, thank you so much for joining us. We'll keep watching or playing. Coming up, we head to Paris and Bloomberg's Sooner Than You Think conference. Bill Evania, director of the U.S. National Counterintelligence and Security Center, discusses how cyber threats could disrupt the smartphone market's global supply chain. This is Bloomberg. President Trump said his administration is reconsidering U.S. penalties that have shut down Chinese telecom company ZTE. The U.S. may now fine the company more than $1 billion. Speaking at the White House Tuesday, President Trump said the changing U.S. stance on ZTE is due to his personal relationship with China's leader.
As a favor to the president, I am absolutely taking a look at it. A lot of the stories on trade were incorrectly written, and I'm not saying that's the reporter's fault. I'm saying that I'm not talking about the trade deal. I don't like to talk about deals until they're done.
President Trump made those comments while meeting with South Korea's president as they discussed the status of talks with North Korea, which may not happen now. That's according to Trump. Bloomberg's Brad Stone, our senior executive editor, caught up with Bill Evania, director of the U.S. National Counterintelligence and Security Center at the Sooner Than You Think conference in Paris. They talked about ZTE and what threats Chinese telecom companies pose to the United States.
We've been pretty clear about the threat from China telecom companies and what they pose to not only our systems or networks, but our cellular communication in the U.S. and worldwide.
Well, let's take a step back and look at this global supply chain where, companies in the U.S., in China, all around the world, their products, their hardware and software is enmeshed. What kind of security threat does it pose that, we use products where components or software are made, in manufacturing facilities located in some of our adversaries like China?
Sure, it's a great question. And obviously, I'm coming from a position of these threats are significant, right? And if you look at the defense of a nation or a company or an industry, it has to start with vulnerabilities and then with threat. And then with the two of them together, you have consequence. And when you have that auspice of understanding your company or your business, you have to understand the capabilities of the adversary or a competitor, and then what makes your company vulnerable. And I think with this perspective on supply chain, you have to look at the cyber capabilities, also the human-enabled cyber, and what do you make and how do you protect it? And I think the cyber security part of that is critical on supply chain. Also, if you're a company or a business or a government and you're procuring something, you need to know who's making that server, who's making that piece of hardware or software, and where does it originate from.
That was Bill Evania, director of the U.S. National Counterintelligence and Security Center with Bloomberg's Brad Stone. More coming up. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in Washington. As the Pentagon struggles to recruit a more tech-savvy workforce, it is facing the confusion of many an old-timer and some not so old-timers. What to make of people who invest in or trade in Bitcoin? The question is whether owning Bitcoin or lesser-known cryptocurrencies is actually an indicator of risky personal behavior that should flag extra scrutiny and security clearances, or is it just another investment choice? Joining us now to discuss, Dan Flatley, who covers the Pentagon for Bloomberg News. So, we're talking about the Pentagon trying to hire a more, tech-savvy, tech-knowing workforce. Right. Why should they care about whether someone is dabbling in Bitcoin?
Sure. So Defense Secretary Jim Mattis has said that, building a tech-savvy cybersecurity force is a priority for the Defense Department. And in order to do this, generally these types of workers have to have a high level of security clearance or be eligible for one. And in order to obtain that, the Pentagon often goes through extensive background checks. And one thing that they look at in particular are financial holdings. A few months ago, there was some indication that the Department of Defense, the Defense Security Service, was considering or would consider Bitcoin a foreign currency, which then would have to be reported on a lengthy sheet or series of forms that anyone applying for a security clearance would have to, fill out. So that kind of got some people nervous because obviously Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have become very popular, particularly among the kind of workers that the Defense Department is looking to recruit. So there were several questions, and the Defense Security Service came out with an official statement saying that there really is no official statement. They basically said, we're looking at this, and we'll let everyone know when we decide.
What would it mean for the cryptocurrency market if the Pentagon decided holding Bitcoin was a security risk?
Well, it sort of speaks to the issue that everyone in the government is trying to figure out how to regulate cryptocurrencies, or if they should be regulated and how they should be regulated. So the SEC regulates them a particular way, or looks at them in a particular way, thinks of them in a particular way. The CFTC thinks of them in a particular way, and the Pentagon may think of them in a particular way. But the Pentagon is a large government agency, and it could sort of throw some cold water on the notion that that these are harmless investments if the Pentagon were to take a particular stance on them in one way or the other.
We're actually going to be talking to a candidate that is very supportive of cryptocurrencies in just a moment, but I'm curious, how are other lawmakers and candidates, as we're going through the midterms now, approaching cryptocurrency in general?
I think that a lot of them aren't quite sure what to make of it, like the rest of government. Certainly Brian Ford, who will be on the program later, I think is supportive of them. And I think a lot of cryptocurrency enthusiasts are looking for someone in Washington who could perhaps figure out a way to get some sort of blanket treatment for these. So part of the issue with the Pentagon and how it looks at it is whether or not cryptocurrencies will be considered a foreign currency. And that is a determination actually made by the Treasury Department. And so all of these things sort of overlap each other. And how this will all sort out sort of remains to be seen. But I think that it's certainly something that people are using not only to gain support, but also to attack opponents if that comes up.
All right, Dan Flatney, Bloomberg News, who covers the Pentagon for us. Thank you so much for sharing that update. As we were discussing, speaking of politics and Bitcoin, something our next guest is quite familiar with. In fact, in his current run as Democratic candidate for Congress in California's 45th district, Brian Ford is being described as the crypto candidate. And that's not just because he takes campaign donations in Bitcoin, but he's also got the support of Bitcoin investors and enthusiasts like the Winklevoss twins, Mike Novogratz, Reed Hastings of Netflix, all of whom have donated the federal maximum of $2,700 to his campaign. And before he began his run for Congress, he was a senior tech advisor for the Obama administration and the director of the MIT Media Lab's Digital Currency Initiative. Brian Ford joins us now. Brian, thank you so much for stopping by. So obviously it's nice to have the cash, but when it comes to actual policy on cryptocurrency, what are your proposals?
Well, I think, as in regards to the attacks on my campaign for accepting crypto, I think Senator Bill Bradley said it best, where attacking a fellow Democrat for accepting Bitcoin is like attacking a fellow Democrat for using the internet back in 1996. What my opponent clearly demonstrated, he's not prepared to lead in the 21st century, and that I am. If you look at the makeup of Congress, less than 4% have a technical background like me. More than 40% are lawyers. And the average age of Democratic leadership is 72 years old. I'm 38. And what we saw in the Mark Zuckerberg congressional hearing, to the amazement of everyone in America, is that our legislators have the skill sets for the 20th century, yet they're tackling 21st century problems. And what we've seen in the face of these attacks is that the rest of America sees this, and we've actually raised more than $130,000 in the wake of these baseless attacks at crypto.forde.com, and people are continuing to support because they want more scientists and technologists in Congress who believe in evidence-based policymaking, not irrational, emotional thinking, which which is what you have right now in Congress. And when I do get there, what we have to look at, and this is not just for cryptocurrencies, let's be clear, this is for all emerging technologies. It turns out with emerging technologies, they're generally not illegal, they're not legal, they're just new. And I experienced this myself as a tech entrepreneur. I served in the Peace Corps in Nicaragua, and then I ended up staying and building one of the largest phone companies in the country after serving in the Peace Corps to help the rural poor. And we brought in a new technology at the time called Voice over IP. And that technology wasn't legal, it wasn't illegal, it was just new, but it was helping hundreds of thousands of rural Nicaraguans save millions of dollars. And that story is similar to all of the folks who are building out new companies with autonomous vehicles, artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency, et cetera.
To be fair, you're not being accused of just accepting Bitcoin. The problem that, you know, your opponents are talking about is what Bitcoin can potentially be associated with. So some of your opponents saying that donors are Bitcoin speculators who oppose cracking down on drug deals and human trafficking. What's your response to that?
That's right. And what Dan Primark did when he talked to their campaign is that they said that they actually have no proof that that is true. And so it's baseless attacks using fear-mongering instead of rational, evidence-based policymaking. And that's a problem with Congress. That's a problem with Washington, D.C. We need to send more scientists and technologists to Congress who think rationally, not emotionally. Because what we have to think about with all these emerging technology companies is that we need regulatory sandboxes to help.
It's not just tech, it's not just lawmakers who don't understand it potentially or don't like it. You've got Bill Gates saying that he would short Bitcoin if he could. You've got Warren Buffett saying that it's rat poison squared.
Yeah, Bill Gates also missed the smartphone, the internet, and a few other revolutionary technologies. So while he hit it right on Microsoft, and I've spoken to Bill Gates about Bitcoin, he's certainly missing the point, and he's got a few other big misses in his history as well.
Now, it is clear that some of our lawmakers don't understand technology. Case in point, Mark Zuckerberg's testimony, where some of the senators and representatives didn't even know how Facebook makes its money. If you were asking Mark Zuckerberg questions today as part of the European Parliament or elsewhere, what would you ask him?
Well, I think there's a couple things that I would ask him. Number one, what was Mark Zuckerberg's personal goal this year? Each year he has a personal goal. His goal this year was to better understand cryptocurrencies and the power of decentralization. And I think what's incredibly critical and what I would have asked him is, what steps are you going to take to be able to enable blockchain-based personal data so that the user can have more control over their data? I know this is possible because we built out a system in my research lab at MIT to do that for medical records so that patients would have better access and better control over their personal information as it gets connected to doctors, and it's incredibly helpful to patients and consumers. But I would also ask him, every 5 minutes he was talking about artificial intelligence this, artificial intelligence that. The question is not whether you can use artificial intelligence. The question we're seeing with artificial intelligence is, does it have systematic biases built into this? This is the 21st century version of our civil rights. That's why the ACLU has stood up a unit on artificial intelligence. And what we need to ensure is that companies who are using artificial intelligence to make judgments and decisions on others, that there's enough transparency in that artificial intelligence, like DARPA is doing with explainable artificial intelligence, to ensure that we as citizens have a right to know how decisions are being made about us or potentially against us, because we've seen too many examples of artificial intelligence systematically discriminating against people of color, for example.
So in
and here's the other
European
thing, actually,
Parliament, hang on, Brian, hang on.
Sure.
In Parliament today, Zuckerberg was asked about regulation in particular and how or if Facebook should be regulated. Take a listen to what he had to say.
I think the internet is becoming increasingly important in people's lives. Some sort of regulation is important and inevitable, and the important thing is to get this right, and to make sure that we have regulatory frameworks that help protect people, that are flexible so that they allow for innovation, that don't inadvertently prevent new technologies like AI from being able to develop.
So cryptocurrency aside, Brian, should Facebook be better regulated? And if so, what regulation would you propose?
So I would look at how we can make sure that, because I think Mark is right. Some of these technologies do need to be regulated, but they need to be regulated in such a way that they have regulatory sandboxes so that we are ensuring that we're protecting consumer safety and consumer rights, while at the same time giving the flexibility to develop business models that have yet been unearthed. And I think that's incredibly important. And I'll give you an example, because sometimes technologies, we got to look back in history rather than look forward with technology and see what worked previously. So I would argue that today, most people don't face any problems with spam. It's mostly a non-issue. And if you look at it, there was a two-pronged strategy to be able to tackle that. One was the CAN-SPAM Act that put out a set of rules and regulations for companies in the United States to abide by. But we knew that those rules would not be able to tackle the Nigerian print scam. And so what tech companies did across America is that they came up with better spam filters. And that helped block out that part of of spam that doesn't relate to what law could cover. And so what you always need is a two-track process. You need regulation that will protect consumer safety and consumer rights without blocking innovation, while at the same time allowing for technology to have the innovation to help achieve and tackle some of these hard problems as well. And then you get to a place that ultimately we're all trying to achieve as policymakers and technologists across this country are trying to achieve, which is just making the world a little better for everyone.
All right. Brian Ford, candidate for Congress in California's 45th District. We'll be watching you on the trail. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Emily.
Now, another story we've been following along those same lines, Amazon being criticized by civil rights groups over its facial recognition software. The ACLU and a coalition of other civil rights groups have demanded that Amazon stop letting law enforcement use its program called Recognition that uses AI to quickly identify people. According to the ACLU, law enforcement agencies in Florida and Oregon are using the service for surveillance. Amazon said various agencies have used Recognition to find abducted people without providing specific examples. Coming up, Maurice Levy, a legend in the ad industry, speaks to Bloomberg from Paris. What advice does he have for Mark Zuckerberg? That's next. This is Bloomberg. Paris is rolling out the red carpet for tech this week as numerous events are underway in the city, including Bloomberg's Sooner Than You Think conference and a high-profile meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron and dozens of tech leaders. Maurice Levy, chairman of the supervisory board at advertising giant Publicis Group, joined Bloomberg Television from Paris and talked about what he hopes to accomplish.
The tech world is now meeting in Paris, and we will start tomorrow with a very important meeting with President Macron about tech for good, how technology can help people to have a better life. And from Thursday to Saturday, we will have the tech world meeting in Paris. We are expecting to get Mark Zuckerberg, Satya Nadella, Ginny Rometty, 6,000 startups, more than 2,000 investors, etc., etc. So it's something which will be extremely important, and it shows that France is committed to be ready for technology, for startups, for entrepreneurship. And this is something which is rather new. It's very fresh, only 3 years. Yeah. And we expect all the planet to have their eyes looking at Paris.
What policies has President Macron brought in to make it a better place to build your startup and to invest as a technology company?
I think the first thing that he did is a state of mind, to change the opinion that including the French could have about entrepreneurship and being successful. In France, it was not so good to be successful. Success was not celebrated, to say the least. And sometimes people were blamed because they were successful and making some wealth. Today, it is interesting to see that President Macron and the government as a whole are encouraging the young people to start up their own business and encouraging the venture capitalists to invest in France and to support startups.
Mr. Macron, President Macron will meet, as you say, with some of 40 technology leaders, including Mark Zuckerberg, Dara Khosrowshahi of Uber. He wants to remind them of their responsibility. Is technology taking its responsibility seriously enough at the moment? What changes need to be made?
The reason why he is organizing the meeting tomorrow with roughly 70 CEOs, some very important names that you have already mentioned, and a few important names in France, the main reason is to see what the future will be and how technology, which is creating some fears. You have a lot of people who are fearing about what artificial intelligence or technology can do to their job, the fact that they may not be able to succeed in the future or even to continue just to work. And there is 3 sessions which will be organized, 3 breakout sessions, one led by Gino Rometti about education, what should be the education in the future. The second is by Dara regarding the future of work, how should we be organizing the work and the continuous training of the people in order that they are never left aside. And last but not least, about equality, gender and diversity. And this is extremely important, that this will be led by Bill McDermott from SAP.
Maurice, we're seeing also, as we speak in about a couple of hours, Mark Zuckerberg stand up in front of European Parliament politicians to describe why the data of millions of Europeans was put into the hands of Cambridge Analytica. There is a concern not just about AI and about jobs, but a concern about privacy of our data. You yourself will be speaking to Mark Zuckerberg on stage on Thursday. What will you ask him about his responsibility for the data of those?
We will be covering a lot of aspects, and including what happened. So I will very candidly open the floor with some few questions regarding what happened. I cannot tell you what will be the answers yet, but clearly it is a conversation which will not only cover what happened with Cambridge Analytica, but also what he is doing for the future. And I feel extremely confident because I believe that in fact, in this operation, there has been probably some weaknesses technically, and that Facebook is a little bit of a victim rather than a complicit in this operation. From what I do know, Cambridge Analytica has abused the confidence of Facebook and has taken assets and information that it should not have taken. And by the way, there is something which is extremely important, is that we are on the eve of GDPR, which is a new European regulation regarding data protection, data privacy, and the fact that you cannot use data without getting the approval and the consent of the users and the owner of the information. And this is probably a new era regarding data and the use of data in the future.
That was Maurice Levy, chair of the supervisory board at Publicis Groupe, speaking to Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde. Tomorrow, we will bring you more coverage from the Sooner Than You Think conference in Paris, including interviews with Nissan's Carlos Ghosn, Deliveroo CEO Will Shu, and BlaBlaCar CEO Frederic Mazzella. Coming up, Sony's music empire is about to get a lot bigger. A lot bigger. How its latest deal will let artists like Beyoncé bring more into the fold. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Sony is set to solidify its position as the largest music publisher in the world when it buys EMI Music for about $2 billion. This will come in the form of a 60% equity stake, something new. CEO Kenichiro Yoshida will set Sony up for years to come.
This move is a way to intensify our content and IP business. Sony and EMI combined own the copyrights to 4.4 million songs. With this deal, Sony becomes one of the largest music publishers in the world. We expect steady income from music publishing, and it will be a key growth area in the long term.
Uber is launching its first taxi-hailing pilot program in Japan. Starting this summer, Uber will essentially operate as a taxi dispatcher, connecting local drivers and passengers in Awaji, a remote island that is home to 120